Hi, welcome. My name's Felice Cleveland. I'm the Education and Public Programs Director here at CAM. And thank you all so much for coming out. I just wanted to give a few announcements about things that we have coming up. The first is next Friday, August 19th from 6:30 to 9 p.m. We have an opening for 3 solo exhibitions with artists Amy Blakemore, Susie Rosemarin, and Thedra Culler-Ledford in our upstairs gallery. You probably came in and saw that they're working on it right now, which is very exciting. And an extra little note about that, at 8 p.m. there will be a performance with the artist Thedra Culler-Ledford. Her work, they'll be smashing a piñata, so that should be a fun thing to see. The next day, on Saturday, there will be a talk with Bill Arning, our director, and Thedra, a gallery walkthrough talking about her work. So definitely come back out for that. A couple extra notes. I hope you all had a chance to check out the beautiful installation by the artist Jae Ko. On Saturday, September 10th, we will have a dance performance in the space at 1:30 p.m. by the Chapman Dance Company, followed by a lecture with the glaciologist Kurt Cuffey coming in from Berkeley. So that should be very interesting, a different take on thinking about this piece here. And then my last announcement, so many things. If anybody knows any teachers, we are having our first annual educator open house on Thursday, September 8th from 4 to 6 p.m., a chance for them to see our exhibitions, learn about all of the tour opportunities and workshops that we have for students. So I would love it if you could spread the word about that. So come on in, have a seat, and I would love to introduce you all to Josh Fischer, the curator of the Rice Gallery, who knows so much about installation art and has so many great experiences, and we're looking forward to seeing so many images and hearing what he has to say tonight. So thank you. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Felice, and thank you to the CAM for inviting me to give this talk, and thank you all for coming out tonight and escaping some of the Houston heat. I've worked at the Rice Gallery as a curator for the past 9 years, and I was really excited when I was invited to give this talk and learning a little bit about Jae Ko and her installation Flow, because in many ways it is a real kindred spirit with a lot of the work that Rice Gallery has done with commissioning site-specific installation. And I'd like to, my kind of plan here is to talk about a few characteristics of Jae Ko's work that I think are run through a lot of installation work that you'll see, and also then show some historical examples with some examples of work that Rice Gallery has done in installation that I think show you kind of a little bit more about what installation art is, and contextualize some of Jae Ko's installation Flow. So to start with her piece here, one thing that I think is really interesting about this work is one of the most obvious things about it, that it uses a really common ordinary material, paper, and specifically paper used in adding machines, like the kind that you might get for a receipt. And she's used it in a really creative, ingenious way, where she receives the paper in these really tight rolls and then unspools them and re-rolls them into these kind of more amorphous, organic shapes that then become the basic module that she uses to build the installation and have it kind of, as she tiles it, flow through the space and connect from wall to wall. And another thing about this piece that's really important is how it kind of has this feeling of something that is either sort of growing into or out of the space, and this real organic quality, which is something that I'm going to show a lot of examples of installations that use that as sort of a way to generate or create a spatial experience for the viewer. And this organic quality partially comes out of the fact that when she gave her talk, she showed this slide of one of her sort of inspirations for the piece, which is This is water that's been frozen in between these jetties in Maryland where she lives. And a lot of her material, the way she's using it, references that kind of slow geological process, and her installation tries to distill some of that experience with nature. And she's also interested in rock formations in Alaska and Nova Scotia, and that's a huge point of inspiration. So just kind of backing up just a little bit, I think it's important to just give a quick definition or sense of what is installation art. So I pulled these images off the website Contemporary Art Daily just as kind of an example of what is essentially kind of a standard or convention in the field, where what you may expect when you walk into a gallery space, a pure white cube and individual paintings and sculptures for isolated contemplation that you'll walk up to and observe, and discrete objects that are each a work of art in their own right. And then this is an example of an early installation at Rice Gallery by Yayoi Kusama called Dot's Obsession from 1997. And it's immediately different in the sense that it treats the whole space as one holistic experience and a single situation that immediately when you walk into it, you're entering into the art. And it really prioritizes the relationship with the viewer, your physical experience with it, and the entire space is inseparable from the work of art. And I think it's a really, installation is also a very special experience in that way, in that it really is like stepping into kind of an artist's world or way of seeing, and is a very powerful experience in that regard. And these are some terms that are commonly associated with installation art, that has this relationship to the viewer. There's this kind of you had to be there quality, which is a real challenge for a lot of scholars who are studying past installations, that you have to, if it doesn't exist anymore, you have to understand it through photographs, critical writings, the artist's account, and there's also can be a theatrical, immersive quality. As I said before, it's art you enter into. There's often touch, smell, sound, a sensory dimension to it, and site-specific, meaning that it's created for that space and that specific architectural situation. And sometimes, and many in the case of some of the ones that I'll show you at Rice Gallery, they're designed to be ephemeral or temporary. And so just to give you a quick sense of, if you haven't been there, what the Rice Gallery space is like, because examples that I'm showing won't make sense if you don't understand what the space is. So this is the exterior of the building in which the gallery is housed. This is Sewell Hall on Rice campus, and there's this courtyard, and you enter through these arched windows. There's a lobby foyer space, and the gallery has this large front glass wall. And then it's kind of basically like a white cube with it's 40 by 44 feet, a 15.5-foot high ceiling. And this is a picture from the rear looking out, and an artist who came for her site visit, Judy Pfaff. Every artist who does an installation at the gallery comes for a site visit. She called this the biggest little space I ever saw, because it has this long visual continuum. And this front glass window or wall is very unique in the sense that most galleries don't have this situation. It gives artists a real challenge. It pictures the installation almost, artists have thought of it like a display case almost for an object, but it sets up a very interesting quality. And it's part of the qualities or the architectural characteristics of this space are what led the Rice Gallery director, Kim Davenport, to adopt this mission of just showing site-specific installation in 1995, which, that this foyer space is used as a passageway for students and people on campus, and what would be able to really maximize the features of the space that would really draw people in and create these kinds of powerful experiences. And at this time in 1995, this is really a moment when it was very forward thinking, because installation, while it had been going on for some time, it was just sort of starting to be regularly integrated into museum programming, and not even that regularly, but these were still exceptions. And so you have a place like Hammer Projects that started in 1999. The image to the right there above is Tim Hawkinson's Uber organ in Mass Mocha, year 2000. And so they had been starting to do installation, and the bottom is Tate Modern's, the series that they commissioned for the Turbine Hall, these massive installations in that space that started in 2000. And then the bottom image is from the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh that had started doing installations since 1990. So it was very, the Rice is still the only university gallery in the nation that has this unique focus. So it's still a very forward-thinking and very unique program. And so despite that kind of more recent history, installation does have really deep roots. So, and what I mean by that is that there's a real relationship between art, architecture, and site that I think you could trace back to the caves in Lascaux. So this is 16,000 years ago, where these drawings serve this ritualistic purpose, it's believed, and you can't peel these out of the cave and have them have the same meaning or feeling. And what I'd like to do here is just show a few more historical examples, give you a real thumbnail sketch alongside some examples of some of the work and installation that Rice Gallery's done, just to show you kind of how this tradition continues or is updated in many instances. So this is Giotto's Arena Chapel in Padua, and this was done in the 14th century, where the architecture itself becomes like a viewing box for these paintings. So your reading of this narrative is constructed spatially. And this is the Rice Gallery update, which is Charlie Roberts' Mambo Jumbo Cabinet of the Cosmos, which is a really over-the-top installation where he was inspired by altarpieces and chapels and made this kind of architectural, housing for his paintings. And so he has these human and animal worlds on one side, and then when you open it, it's a cabinet of curiosities, and you see the figure in the center is supposed to be the first ancestor giving birth to the human and animal worlds. And this is then moving way forward in time. One of the most important precedents for installation art that still inspires a lot of contemporary artists, which is Kurt Schwitter's Merzbau, which was done. He started the project in 1920s through the 30s, and he slowly, over time, built this inside his home and studio. So what it is it's this kind of geometric, faceted architecture that kind of has the feeling of a grotto. And he thought of it as almost like walking into a Cubist painting and going for a walk. That's how he thought of it, where there was no privileged point of view. You went in and meandered through it, and he housed in a lot of the little niches of the grotto a lot of personal relics, like a friend stayed over and woke up realizing that a lock of his hair was missing, and it had wound up in one of these. And he also had sculptures of his. And so it had all this very personal meaning, yet it was very tied into ideas at the time that were happening with Dada and bringing art closer to everyday life and having this sort of collapsing of the two, which is a really important characteristic of a lot of the impulse behind installation art. So this is the Rice Gallery kind of rendition where Stephen Hendy created the piece called Super Thrive in 2000, where he, in a somewhat similar way, slowly created within the space this faceted kind of cave-like setting, and this is made out of foam core that he has cut to slowly build out, and he's using black electrical tape, and I think he worked for 14 hours a day blaring heavy metal music and didn't want to be interrupted. And the glow that it's fluorescent light that is providing that glow. And at this time, he was interested in, the internet was becoming a big deal in that time, and he was really interested in creating something that was in between a virtual space and a natural space, like a cave, and that had also an isolated feeling, like being in a chat room where you're surrounded by people, but you're also alone. And then this is a less significant example than the Merzbau, but this is a piece by Herbert Ferber, and it was in a show in the Whitney in 1961 called Sculpture as Environment. And this was when artists were interested in trying to extend painting into 3 dimensions, and he was interested in the fluidity of painting and its malleability, but how could you achieve that sculpturally in a way that would subsume the viewer? And so this was in a show called Sculpture as Environment. And I love these drawings that he did because of how they then look similar to a piece by Henrique Oliveira. This is a Brazilian artist who, these were his sketches, where he's inspired by a very similar thing. He uses wood from the plywood construction fences in Brazil, and the wood deteriorates and he can peel it away, and he uses it and shapes it against the wall, and he paints the wood as well. And what he's interested in is what if you could walk inside of an abstract painting, essentially? And he was very inspired by that time by the work of Frank Auerbach. And so he was thinking, like, what if, that was blown up to beyond human scale, and what would that feel like? And so he used this flexible plywood as an armature, and then that was built against the wall. And then it kind of grew out in this very organic way that also still had a feeling tied to landscape, like there's a stalactite. And this is the final piece. And these forms kind of undulated out from the wall. And with this kind of plywood, this piece was called tapumes, which is a word for that type of wood that they use for the construction fences. So it's just made out of a very common, or not common to us necessarily, but a discarded material. And then moving around the same time, you have the work of artists involved in happenings and other work of the 1960s. And this is a very famous show called Environments, Situations, and Spaces at Martha Jackson Gallery that included the work of artists like Alan Capro and Klaus Oldenburg, who are considered some of the more immediate influences for the field of installation art. So this is Alan Capro's yard, where he took all these old tires and put them in Martha Jackson's sculpture courtyard. And he was really interested in Pollock at the time. Pollock was a huge influence in terms of this idea of immediate, direct experience, art that does not obey a particular frame, this kind of all-over experience that breaks outside of these certain boundaries. And he applied a similar kind of idea to how he put these tires in her yard. And he was, more interested in, rather than in the same way that Schwitters with the Merzbau wanted to collapse art into everyday life, he wanted to bring everyday life into the gallery. And this was one of the reviews at the time that, it said that, the terrible children invaded her gallery, and that they were more of these baffling, non-commercial commodities, things you can't use or sell or label even. And the review goes on to say, why would Miss Jackson, whose commercial acumen is well known, clutter up her fashionable yard with a bunch of junky car tires? And so there's, this was a pretty shocking gesture, and it's very interesting how a lot of the roots of installation art are in this attitude that it's non-commercial, it can't be bought or sold. In many ways, it's antagonistic, anti-institutional, and that was a huge impetus for a lot of these works. And this is a piece called The Store by Klaus Oldenburg, where he in the front, his studio was in the back, and he set up this makeshift storefront where he sold these just very common objects that he made out of plaster and muslin, food, sneakers. And then this is another piece by Alan Capro that really emphasizes also the interactive, participatory nature of installation art, where this is called Words, where people could come in and rearrange these words to make kind of impromptu poetry, and this sort of very democratic attitude that anyone could come in and be a part of the art experience. And this is now the Rice Gallery, a piece by Stephen Keen called Fresh Art Daily that he did in 1997, where he also created what was like a store in the gallery. He mass produces his own paintings, meaning that he can set up a large easel with about 30 or 40 paintings set up, and then quickly recreate the same image over and over and over and sell them very cheap, like $1 to $15. And so anybody can come in and come away with a piece of art. He was interested in the idea that it would be, at that time as expensive as a compact disc, and everybody could get it. So it has the same kind of democratic impulse of Alan Capro. And then now, to me, the history of installation art kind of collapses in on itself, because this is an artist who had a show at Rice Gallery who is also one of the pioneers of installation art. This is a piece in 1980 by the artist Judy Pfaff, and she had been working since the mid-70s creating installations, and that really around that time is when installation became a self-conscious genre. They had a word for it. The word installation started being used. It wasn't until around the 70s that became a word to describe installation art. And she was really at the forefront of that. She studied under an abstract expressionist painter, Al Held, who she then kind of applied the way that, as we saw before, that Pollock might approach the blank canvas. She applied that to the gallery space, where what is this intuitive way of working that I can piece together materials in a way that responds in the moment and creates this kind of sensuous environment. And so this piece in particular was inspired by a snorkeling trip in the Caribbean. And it kind of becomes, I think that it's been described as both kind of an external but also an internal landscape, where a lot of her work has autobiographical qualities, like tree branches could also be read as arteries, or something related to the body. It also does look like an abstract painting essentially pulled apart into 3 dimensions. And so this is the announcement for her show from Rice Gallery, which was called All of the Above. And she kind of faked this picture, she says, because she wouldn't normally do this, but because one of the most interesting things about her is that she's really a good example of a very pure way of working site-specifically, meaning that she doesn't make a model, she doesn't make drawings that relate directly, they're not preparatory sketches. She has a sense of what she might do and brings the raw materials. And so when she came to Rice Gallery, she brought everything. It's like a mobile artist studio. She brought even a coffee pot and a broom. And so she's completely self-sufficient, and then she works in the space and kind of feels her way through it with a certain kind of, begins to slowly develop the kind of sculptural and visual language that she'll use. So some of it started with snapping these lines with dyed yarn against the wall, and then slowly building it from there. And this is the final installation, where one of the things she really noticed was that front glass wall, and she wanted to slow down the ability to see the whole thing at once. And so she put this polycarbonate plastic on the window, which I really love the idea that it's slowing it down, yet it looks like a blur. It looks like something fast that you're zooming by, and that this whole installation was incredibly formally complex and full of all these really subtle kind of contradictions. Her work almost looks fast, chaotic, but it has all this thinking, and it's been called a form of a kind of structured chaos. And so she was very interested in weather systems at the time, and so it had all this kind of centrifugal energy. Things are in this kind of precarious state where they look like they could topple over. And she's said that she has even gone in a couple times, even after a show is open, and torn it back apart and redid it, because her work really has this kind of additive, you can kind of almost see it as it's being made, or it embodies a kind of process of thinking. And then I show this in almost like the as a contrast in the sense that this installation took incredible amounts of planning. So this is a young architect, Benjamin Ball, and he's part of the architecture duo Ball Nogues, and used all the tools that an architect uses to plan a very large-scale, significant piece, using 3D modeling. And the installation that they did called Rip Curl Canyon evolved out of this earlier piece that they did for a gala for Frank Gehry, where he was launching a line of jewelry that he designed for Tiffany, and they were really interested in creating this environment using corrugated cardboard, where they were inspired by Gary's cardboard chairs that he called their easy edge chairs. And they had both worked with Frank Gehry and had a lot of respect for him. And to develop their show at Rice Gallery, they took this basic way of working and then applied it to being inspired by this Grant Wood painting. So the show is in conjunction with an exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts on the Modern West, and they selected this Grant Wood painting as something they were interested in, and trying to create an installation that would kind of capture this feeling of these rolling hills. And so this is just a little bit of the process, using the cardboard that they cut to this very specific shapes, and then these were plywood ribs that were cut by a machine controlled by a computer, CNC routed, and then the cardboard was sandwiched in between the ribs, and then that's the final piece. And so this was a really kind of had this undulating, felt like almost waves coming toward the front of the wall. It started near the ceiling of the gallery or higher up on the wall and descended down. So you could actually climb on top of this piece, and that's the view from the top looking out. And then there was also a space underneath it that you could go under it as well. So those are the artists right there. And I think that piece weighed about 8 tons. And so this is from the very heavy to the light. So this is an artist named Yasuaki Onishi. And in the upper left corner there, you see his preferred material, which is plastic sheeting that you would use like a painter's drop cloth if you were painting your house. And he uses that and black hot glue to create these really incredible suspended installations. So the series that he's working within is called Reverse of Volume, and he uses the glue as a kind of suspension device. So it's kind of a little tricky to explain, but on the ceiling of the gallery is fishing line that he drips the glue over, and then as it descends down from the fishing line, it attaches to the sheet. And once enough glue is in place, you can remove the boxes, and the final piece is basically a cast of that shape. So he calls it casting the invisible, and he's really interested in that sort of sculptural process and creating a positive space, a void out of creating the space out of something that is no longer there. So another really important element to this was how you approach it. So he wanted it to be where from the front glass view, from the foyer, you can't tell its form, you can't tell how deep it recedes, and then when you enter, it really opens up, and then it opens up, yet you're also enclosed within it once you walk under it. So it kind of has this feeling of like an inner sanctum or a cave, and it also reminded people of a floating mountain, a floating cloud. There were all these metaphors for landscape that people use to describe this piece. And when you were underneath it, another element to this is the transformation of this material. So the way he lit it, this plastic sheeting that is so banal in a way almost became like rice paper or something very elegant with these, and the drip marks from the black hot glue look like calligraphic marks, and it completely transformed this material. And I showed this just because this was a really clever thing that our gallery manager, Christine Medina, made with a student that shows some of the costs that go into creating one of these. This is something people are always really curious about. And so in this case, his materials budget was very low, $70 for the plastic cloth or sheet. But, the cost was getting him and his assistant from Japan. And a really huge challenge, I think, within installation art is how do you find someone who can address a large space, who can create this kind of transformative spatial experience, yet within a certain prescribed budget, with not an astronomical cost, and who can work in this very ingenious way. I mean, you could put me in the gallery with a plastic sheet and hot glue, and I would not do this in 10 million years. So I think it's so brilliant. And then along those lines of inexpensive materials, nothing is cheaper than dirt. So this is a picture that I took in Sugarland as I was collecting dirt, which will make more sense in a second. But it was for this artist, Yusuke Asai, who I saw this image online of this is a classroom in India. He was invited by a program called the Wall Art Festival, where their mission is to create more inspiring places for children to study and learn in rural villages. And so he collected soil from the local area and then made this amazing kind of all-over immersive mural, very playful. And when we invited him to the gallery, we knew we were going to have to get a lot of dirt. And so we didn't have time, or he didn't have time to come and also collect it. So we collected it for him. I communicated with a soil scientist at Texas A&M and a geology professor at Rice, who would send me a Google map with pinpoints where we might be able to find some dirt. Our preparator, David Kruger, is building an artist studio in West Texas, so he was able to get some from West Texas, some from Enchanted Rock. It came from all over Texas. We got the artist Yusuke Asai said that this was the biggest range of colors he had ever worked with. But the process was really interesting because, naively I thought, oh, you just get it and he starts, it's easy. But this was extremely meticulous. You had to dry it, separate the colors, and then grind it with, like a mortar and pestle technique. I mean, we tried using a coffee grinder, which immediately broke. And to get this really fine pigment that he would then add water to and make his palette. So this is his painting table. And there he is painting, and he has the board behind him shows the colors and where they came from. That was very important to him because he calls these earth paintings, and they're, that connection to the local area is really important to him. And so he was a really interesting artist because he basically could not stop drawing. Like, you would go to dinner with him and he would just be drawing on the sugar packets. It was like a compulsion. And so this piece felt like it could go on forever. He was really working on it day and night with his assistants, even sometimes sleeping at the gallery. And these were the basic sketches that he was using, but a lot of it was kind of invented as he went, where these sort of areas got more and more intricate, and this is the final piece where it felt like like these rolling hills that you would take in a cross section out of, and this was kind of the life inside them. And he really does think of dirt or soil. It's an organic thing, it's alive. I think he wants to capture that quality, and so he's primarily self-taught, and he describes his art education as going to zoos and museums, and he draws a lot of animals and other imagery inspired by a lot of Aboriginal art, tribal art, as well as, like, you could see probably some elements of like Japanese manga, and it's all kind of filtered through this very personal language. And it kind of had this feeling of this really bustling, dense sort of ecosystem. The title of this piece was Yamatane, which means mountain seed. And that just gives you a sense of what the material was like. It was really interesting too, because he was using just what he was given from what we could collect. It had this really nice cohesive range of color, and that's a view from the the outside of the gallery. So these are just some kind of examples that I felt tied in an interesting way to Jae Ko's piece, and examples of artists dealing with landscape, this kind of organic, generative growth, and also using common materials. But I'm happy to take any questions.